About a year and a half ago, I went on a conference for pastors. It's called the Pastors Workshop, and it focused on administration. This is one area in the seminary they really didn't teach too much about. So they brought in experts throughout the United States in church administration, so HR, finances, councils, how to run meetings, and everything like this. And one of the things they said is try to implement one thing a year. Don't try to overwhelm yourself. And so the first thing I implemented actually was something called a stand-up meeting. And that's exactly what it sounds like. It's a stand-up meeting. You see so often, at least in the church world and maybe in your own business world, meetings can this kind of drag on forever, right? And so what they said is implement a stand-up meeting where everyone stands up when you meet. And so once a week, all the church staff gets together. It's 9 o'clock on Wednesday morning, and we start with a prayer, and we stand up, and we meet. Unless you're pregnant, then you're able to sit down. This last year, praise God, there was a lot of staff members sitting down. That's a great gift that we have. But when we made this change to stand-up meetings, something immediately changed. The meetings got a lot shorter, right? And they also got a lot more intentional. You're only going to say the most important things. And in this, all of a sudden, communication got better amongst staff. Not as many balls are being dropped. And sure enough, we just feel like we are a better team now, we're a better staff now. And I think one of the reasons is because of the stand-up meeting. Obviously, I still meet with the staff individually, and we usually sit down, right? But it's still a great thing to have an intentional time where we're just going to talk about the essentials, the most important things. In a lot of ways today, I feel like this gospel is a stand-up meeting that Jesus had with the disciples. Now, actually, it wasn't a stand-up meeting because in verse 14 it says the disciples were sitting down, which maybe makes sense because when Jesus appears to them and they're sitting down, the first thing he does in verse 14 of Mark, chapter 16, is he rebukes them. So it's kind of that boss yelling at them a little bit, right? Which is always a great feeling to have, huh? That's always great. But he rebukes them for their unbelief. But then he tells them the most important thing. And he says this all throughout Mark's gospel, by the way. But remember, this is him now speaking right before his ascension. So what words is he going to leave with them? What words of wisdom? What point did he try to address to them? Let's go take a look. Mark chapter 16, verse 15 and 16. Jesus said to his disciples, "Go into the whole world and proclaim the gospel to every creature." So this great commission, right? Go into the whole world and proclaim the good news, that's the gospel, to every creature. Go and evangelize, is what he's saying. And why? Well, that's verse 16. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved. Whoever does not believe will be condemned. Those are two different messages. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved. Whoever does not will be condemned. And of course, we want everyone to be saved. We want everyone to be baptized. We want everyone to be part of the church, part of God. We don't want people to not believe. And so this is why Jesus sends the disciples out. And he says, go now and tell them of the most important thing, the resurrection, that Jesus truly is the Lord, that he is Christ, that the church is here for them, that we are here for them. And then what does he do? He ascends to the Father, interceding for us at the right hand of the Father. You know, he doesn't do this Minnesota goodbye, by the way, where he says the most important thing and then 20 minutes later leaves, right? He's like, gone, here I go. And up he goes. We more than likely at the end of our life are not going to have that same opportunity. It doesn't happen that way usually. Sometimes our life is taken suddenly. Sometimes it's a long illness. But usually those last couple days, last couple hours, last couple weeks sometimes are spent in kind of the in-between place of this world and the next. But what would you say for your last statement here on earth? What would you say? I've had the experience as a priest be able with some people when it is close to their final passage from this world to the next. You know what they don't talk about? They don't talk about the weather. They don't talk about sports. They don't talk about food. They talk about their family, and they talk about God. Jesus today speaks of God. And they're intentional in how they say this. And you could see the great love they have for their family. And what a beautiful witness it is when they have this great love for God. As they're holding on to a rosary, as they're holding on to a crucifix. My grandpa, when he passed away, the last words that ever came out of his mouth were the Our Father. He hadn't spoken for 3 days, and all of a sudden we prayed the Our Father, and he kicked right in. What a beautiful witness. They're intentional. You know, we're not only called to be intentional at the end, but to go out and evangelize, we must be intentional all the time. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about the weather or sports or food or all that other stuff, but in our conversations, do we bring up God? Do we live this intentional life of being intentional disciples of Christ? This is how we're called to evangelize. So often we figure, there's two things I'm never going to talk about, especially at Mother's Day brunch or lunch, right? I'm not going to talk about politics, and I'm not going to talk about God. I agree with one of those statements. Politics, dicey subject, right? God, well, he's kind of the most important person in our life. Shouldn't we talk about him? Shouldn't we witness about him in everything that we do? I mean, we're kind of relying on this. It kind of comes down to, let's go back to this passage, verse 16. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved. Whoever does not believe will be condemned. There's a lot riding on this belief. Not just for us, but for those whom we love as well. And Jesus is saying, go out and spread the good news. Be intentionally your main vocation. And what's our main vocation? It's being a son or daughter of God. And from that, we can be a father or a mother, a husband or a wife. From that, we can go out and do our work. Before I can be a priest, before I'm a pastor, first and foremost, I have to be the son that God created me to be. And to be intentional in glorifying him and living for him and spreading the good news. Once again, today we know it's Mother's Day, and I think mothers can be a great witness of the faith. I know in my whole life I've been blessed with my mom, but most especially as well my grandmas. As a child, I remember as a 7-year-old, I just thought all my grandmas did all day, what I thought was they prayed all day. That's all they did, I thought. I don't think they did anything else. Because every single time I go and visit them, we'd go to church, right? And sure enough, my grandma would drag me on Saturday to go to confession every single time. I'm like, why am I going to confession? But she always took me with, right? And she was they were both known as church ladies. And even now, one of my grandmas, she's now, I think, 93 years old. And every single day, she watches Mass on TV at EWTN at 11:30. We know we cannot call during that time. And she knows those priests like the back of her hand, the different priests at EWTN. Right? And we can call her and we can say, Grandma, I need some prayers. And it's beautiful. And I swear, she has those rosaries, beads, just beat down to the knob, I guess, in a certain sense. I remember when I was ordained a priest, I look out in the congregation, and sure enough, what's my grandma doing? She's not listening to the homily, I'll tell you that much. Right? What's she doing? She's praying the rosary. That's all she does. She prays. And what a beautiful witness. They're both intentional in their relationship with God. They never hid it. They don't hide it. One's passed away and one's still alive. And they've never hidden their faith. They wanted to pass it on. And in doing so, they passed it on to their children. And they've passed it on to their grandchildren. I remember when my grandma Deutsch passed away, we got together for the funeral. And we never talked about her in the sense of what she did for work. She was a bank teller. She had great stories, actually. She got robbed, survived, but got held up a couple of times. And to think of this 5'3" woman who talks all the time being held up, I think the robber left because they didn't want to listen to her anymore. And I say this in the charity of my heart. My grandma was awesome, but she liked to talk a lot, right? We didn't talk about that. We didn't talk about her love of gardening. We didn't talk about any of that. The only thing the cousins and I talked about was her faith. Because that was the most important thing to her. And how she passed it on. Is our faith the most important part of our life? Are we intentional? Do we live it out in a public way? Not so people can look at us and say, oh, look how holy they are, or I wish I could be like them. But rather, we live in a public way because we know that that's what we live for. We're living for God. There's nothing greater, no one greater than Him. And we must be intentional in this. When we're intentional, we can be that witness that God desires us to be. And this, of course, is a key part of evangelization, to be intentional in all that we do. And so the challenge today is this. When we leave here, let's not leave God behind. Let's bring Him with. Let's be that public witness. And in doing so, intentionally talking about God, living for God, will be a witness to others so that they too may believe and may be one with God.